So who is a stakeholder? Stakeholder is someone who affects the project or someone who is getting affected by the project. So as a project manager, it is our duty to make them engaged in the work and make them contribute to the success. When I say them, they are the stakeholders. It's not an easy job for sure, considering multiple priorities that the stakeholders has. It's very difficult as a project manager to make people come towards our own project. So the stakeholders who are affected by the project can, they can take both positive effects and also negative effects, right? So not always the persons are affected only positively because of the project. Like for example, we have an automation project which is going to eliminate 10 employees from the organization. So all those 10 employees are being affected negatively because of this new automation project. So, and again, when we talk about the differences between the stakeholders, some stakeholders are quite influential. So consider a functional leader who's head of the complete research and development organization or department. So he's quite influential. Whatever he says, there is a lot of support to his word. He can get things done. So similarly, a stakeholder who is not as influential as the functional leader. So it could be just an IT engineer who has his influence only within his own work scope. So he cannot take management decisions. So everybody is important here. It's not like only CEOs can come to create a code. So not all CEOs are so free that they can come and code it. So the person who is less influential is also important. The person who is highly influential is also important for the project. So every stakeholder is important for the project to move ahead. So the project manager's duty is to analyze each one of these profiles, who is key for the project, who is not so important for the project. There are also some stakeholders who are not directly contributing to the stage of the project. So, for example, a logistics guy or a packaging guy, he might not have that much influence at the beginning of the project, but he will have influence at the end of the project. So, we have to profile each and every stakeholder and understand who is important at this particular stage of the project. When we talk about latest trends here, new engagement techniques like team building activities, multiple brainstorming ideas to improve the bonding, the rapport between the stakeholders, they're all being used. Supporting the stakeholders who are overloaded, that is also being done. Sometimes a new staff or support stakeholder is also being added. This is more prominently seen in agile methods, right? So when agile sprints are happening, we understand that who is overloaded and who is having a bit of free time. So with this understanding, the person who has some free time can support the person who is doing a lot of tasks. Of course, only when he is capable to do it. So let's have a quick look at the processes. Okay, we have 4 processes to cover also here. So let's quickly go one by one, identifying the stakeholders. So here, whoever are relevant for the project manager, he has to consider their interests and most importantly, the willingness of the stakeholders. So that is the identification part. So sometimes one of the stakeholders might be really busy with some other important project. So he might not be willing, even if he is important for this project. So, and he might have support of some influential people in the organization. So we cannot force him even when he is important to us. So his willingness is also important. So similarly, plan the stakeholder engagement. Here the approach, about how well we can encourage the engagement of the people by meeting their needs and expectations. So that is the plan here. Managing is about resolving the issues between two stakeholders or supporting the effective communication. All these things are in the management. Monitoring, as we all know, it's nothing but controlling or assessing the performances of each and every stakeholder. Let's go a little bit in depth. The first process is identifying the stakeholders. What happens here is this is performed basically periodically and not done at one point in the project, because I know it's painful, or I think I have already mentioned this to you. Removing a stakeholder at the middle of the project, it is as painful as it can be. So a complete set of knowledge or experience goes away directly. So identification of the stakeholders, it is done at the very beginning of the project. But if in case some of the key stakeholders had to stop working on the project because of some XYZ reasons, he might be going on a long leave or he might be even leaving the organization. So in that case, we can also use this identification part at the middle of the project. So let's have a quick look at the outputs. We have 4 outputs to cover. First thing is stakeholder register that gets updated. What happens here is it contains information in about the identified stakeholders. Usually an employee number is written against all these identified stakeholders in this register. So if there is no employee number, usually there is an employee number, but some organizations, what they do, they give project specific ID numbers. So if in case of some government confidential projects, some special ID cards are given who can work in only some restricted areas. So such special identifications are all, they are given and then recorded in the stakeholder register. The change requests, any process or feature that is being modified, that gets updated after this process. All the important or relevant components like project management plan, the requirements management plan, the communications management plan, they're all updated here. And the project documents like, for example, assumptions log, the issues log, the risk register, everything that we have learned before, that gets updated here. Let's have a quick look at the inputs. Okay, we have 7 inputs that we can consider. Project charter is referred. Let's say the key stakeholders list that is available in the project charter from the previous projects. So that can be an important document to refer. Business documents like business case, benefits management plan, all the strategic documents, they can be referred here. All the important components from project management plan, they are referred. All the relevant project documents are referred. The memorandum of understanding, non-disclosure agreements, they are referred. And the default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, they're also referred as inputs here. Let's have a look at the tools and techniques. The experts are consulted, of course, the people who has knowledge about the power structure, and somebody who is basically have an understanding of politics within the organization. So they come quite handy here because they know who is the most influential person, they know who can be the most important person for the project, so they can be onboarded. Data gathering techniques, all the general techniques like brainstorming, they're all used here. Multiple data analysis tools can be used. Data representation techniques, although we have learned some, I think one of the very important data representation tool which might attract some questions in the exam is this power interest grid. At least one question you can expect from power interest grid. So what happens here is, in the vertical line we have power, in the horizontal line we have interest. So this is power versus interest. And here we have interest, here we have power. It goes from low to high. Similarly, in this way, it goes from low to high. So this is the high point, this is the low point. Similarly, this is the low point and this is the high point. So what happens here is we are profiling each and every stakeholder here using data representation. When we say profiling, a person who has very high interest and a high power. So he could be the functional leader of R&D. He has very good power and he also has very high interest in the organization. So he falls at this quadrant. So when we take 4 different quadrants, so a person who is in this quadrant, we have to manage him very closely. Manage closely. He's the most important person in the complete project for us. A person who has high power, but he has very low interest. He doesn't have interest on the project. What we have to do as a project manager, we have to keep him satisfied. We don't have to manage him closely. We have to keep him satisfied by giving regular updates about the project. Even though he doesn't have interest, he has power. He has power to take decisions of the project. So it is a project manager's duty to keep him informed about these statuses. That is the keep satisfied. And a person who has very less power, but he has a great interest, like the junior engineers, although they have very less power, they have quite a bit of interest in the project. They want to grow in the organization, they want to contribute, they want to prove themselves. So we always have to, as a project manager, we have, although they are not involved in the project, it is our duty to keep them informed about the project statuses. If they are involved in the project, of course they know the knowledge of the project by themselves. Even if they are not, it is our duty as a manager to keep them informed. And the person who has very less power and less interest, they fall here in this category. We can almost ignore them, but it is not good to ignore. So we can spend minimum effort here. So the PMBOK guide says we can spend minimum effort on this stakeholder. So this is the power interest grid. At least one question you can definitely expect from this topic, hearing it. And not just this data representation. Before we move to the meetings, there are also other representation tools, like the stakeholder cube, for example, the salience model, or the direction of influence. Who is influencing who? A to B, or is it B to A? Right. So if it is the CEO of the organization, we of course know who's influencing who. But let us consider that A and B, both of them are functional heads. So in this case, who can influence who? We don't know whether R&D can influence the marketing or marketing influences the R&D. So the influence can go both ways. So that kind of representation diagrams are done. And of course, meetings serve as a very important tool.